In the vast emptiness of space, where stars twinkled like distant lanterns and planets floated silently in their orbits, humanity had carved out a fragile existence. They had spread across several star systems, building colonies on barren moons, and terraforming dead worlds into places where life could thrive. But despite their progress, humans were still divided, arguing over borders, resources, and power. The governments of Earth couldn't agree on anything, leaving the colonies to fend for themselves against threats both natural and alien. The Concord Alliance loomed large in the minds of everyone. It wasn't just one species, but a coalition of advanced alien races that had united under a single banner. Their ships were sleek, their weapons devastating, and their arrogance unmatched. For years they had expanded their territory, swallowing up weaker civilizations and forcing others to bow to their will. To them, humanity was nothing more than an annoyance, a backward species with outdated technology and no real unity. Nathan Brooks stood on the bridge of the SS Vanguard, his hands clasped tightly behind his back as he stared at the holographic display hovering above the central console. The image showed a map of the contested region with red dots marking Concord positions and blue ones representing the few human ships stationed there. His ship was one of those blue dots, and it was painfully obvious how outnumbered they were. The Vanguard wasn't even considered a proper warship. It was a scout vessel retrofitted with whatever weapons Earth's engineers could scrounge together. "Commander?" came a soft voice from behind him. Nathan turned to see Rachel Dawson standing there, her arms crossed nervously over her chest. She was young, probably younger than most of the crew, but she had a sharp mind and a knack for solving problems. Her dark hair was tied back in a messy bun, and her glasses reflected the faint glow of the screens around her. "I've run the numbers again. If we engage directly, we won't last 5 minutes." Nathan sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. He appreciated Rachel's honesty, even if it wasn't what he wanted to hear. "Thanks for the update, Rachel. Keep working on the cloaking system. We might not have brute force, but we can still surprise them." Rachel nodded and hurried off, her boots clicking softly against the metal floor. Nathan watched her go, then glanced at the rest of the bridge crew. Alex Carter sat at the pilot's station, his fingers tapping impatiently on the controls. He was lean and wiry, with a mop of sandy blonde hair and a perpetual scowl etched onto his face. Laura Hayes, the medic, leaned casually against the wall, her arms folded as she observed everything with calm detachment. She had a quiet strength about her, the kind that made people trust her without question. The comms crackled to life, interrupting Nathan's thoughts. A message from Earth Command appeared on the main screen, accompanied by the stern face of Admiral Grayson. "Brooks, you're aware of the situation," the Admiral said, his tone clipped and devoid of emotion. "We're sending every available ship to reinforce your position, but it'll take time. Until then, you're on your own." Nathan swallowed, hard, nodding even though he knew the Admiral couldn't see him. "Understood, sir. We'll hold the line." Grayson gave a curt nod before cutting the transmission. Nathan exhaled slowly, turning back to the hologram. "Hold the line. Easy enough to say when you were sitting safely on Earth, hundreds of light years away. Out here, surrounded by enemies who viewed humans as little more than pests. Holding the line felt like an impossible task." The next few days passed in tense silence. The crew prepared for battle, running drills and checking equipment until they were certain everything was in working order. Rachel spent hours in the engine room, tweaking the cloaking device and muttering to herself under her breath. Alex flew practice maneuvers, pushing the Vanguard to its limits and occasionally earning disapproving glares from Nathan when he pushed too far. Laura kept busy tending to minor injuries and making sure everyone stayed hydrated and fed. Then, one morning, the Concord fleet arrived. Their ships filled the viewport, massive and menacing. The largest of them, the Zorathian Colossus, looked like a floating fortress, bristling with cannons and glowing with energy shields. Smaller cruisers flanked it, forming a protective barrier that seemed impenetrable. Nathan felt a chill run down his spine as he gazed at the enemy formation. This was it, the moment they had been dreading. A communication request flashed on the screen, and Nathan accepted it. The face of Xylar Kryn appeared, filling the display. He was an insectoid, creature with gleaming black eyes and mandibles that clicked rhythmically as he spoke. His voice was deep and resonant, carrying an undertone of mockery. "You are the leader of this fleet?" he asked, his words dripping with disdain. Nathan straightened, meeting the alien's gaze without flinching. "I'm Commander Nathan, Brooks of the SS Vanguard. What do you want?" Kryn tilted his head, studying Nathan as if he were some curious specimen. "Your kind amuses me, sending such pitiful vessels to oppose us. Do you truly believe you stand a chance?" Before Nathan could respond, Alex muttered under his breath, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Tell him we're full of surprises, boss." Nathan shot Alex a warning glance before addressing Kryn again. "We're here to defend our territory. Leave now, or we'll make you regret it." Kryn let out a harsh, grating laugh that echoed through the speakers. "Regret? You cannot harm us, human. Surrender your colonies and perhaps we will allow you to live." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Nathan clenched his fists, anger simmering beneath the surface. He hated being mocked, hated the way Kryn dismissed them as insignificant. But he also knew they couldn't afford to let emotions cloud their judgment. They needed a plan, something clever enough to give them an edge. Later that evening, Nathan gathered the crew in the mess hall. The room was dimly lit, the hum of the ship's engines providing a steady backdrop to their conversation. Rachel sat hunched over a tablet, scrolling through schematics while absently chewing on a protein bar. Alex lounged in his chair, twirling a pen between his fingers. Laura perched on the edge of a table, her legs crossed as she listened intently. "We can't fight them head-on," Nathan began, pacing back and forth. "They outnumber us, outgun us, and their ships are better equipped. But we have something they don't. Creativity. We need to hit them where it hurts, somewhere unexpected." Rachel looked up from her tablet, her brow furrowed. "Like what? Their supply lines? Those are heavily guarded." "Exactly," Nathan replied, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Which is why we'll use the Vanguard's cloaking system to slip past their defenses. Once we're inside, we strike quickly and get out before they know what hit them." Alex raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "And what happens if they catch us? That cloak isn't foolproof, you know." "It doesn't have to be perfect," Nathan countered. "It just has to buy us enough time to do some damage. Every second we distract them is a second they aren't focusing on the rest of the fleet." Laura spoke up, her voice steady and measured. "It's risky, but it could work. We'll need to coordinate carefully, though. One mistake, and we're done for." Nathan nodded, grateful for her support. "Agreed. Rachel, I need you to finish upgrading the cloaking system ASAP. Alex, prep the ship for evasive maneuvers. Laura, make sure the med bay is stocked. We're going to need it." The crew dispersed, each heading to their respective stations. As Nathan returned to the bridge, he allowed himself a moment of reflection. The odds were stacked against them, and failure would mean the loss of not just their lives but possibly the entire colony. Yet, as daunting as the challenge was, Nathan couldn't shake the feeling that they had a chance. Maybe not a big one, but a chance nonetheless. The Vanguard drifted silently through space, its crew preparing for the fight of their lives. Outside, the conquered fleet loomed like a storm cloud, ready to unleash its fury. Inside, hope burned brightly, fueled by determination and the unshakable belief that even the smallest fleet could change the course of history. The SS Vanguard floated silently in the vast emptiness of space, its crew moving with quiet urgency. Every corridor echoed with the sound of footsteps as Nathan Brooks and his team prepared for their daring mission. The plan was risky, almost reckless. but it was the only option they had. If they succeeded, they could strike a blow against the Concord Alliance that might buy humanity some time. If they failed, the consequences would be catastrophic. Rachel Dawson worked tirelessly in the engine room, her hands moving deftly over wires and circuits. She had spent hours refining the cloaking system, trying to squeeze every bit of performance out of the outdated technology. Sweat dripped down her forehead, but she didn't stop. The fate of the mission, and possibly the entire fleet, rested on her shoulders. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she stepped back and wiped her hands on her grease-stained jumpsuit. "It's ready," she said softly, more to herself than anyone else. On the bridge, Alex Carter sat at the controls, his fingers hovering over the console. He was restless, eager to get moving, but he forced himself to stay calm. Nathan stood beside him, staring at the viewport where the Concorde fleet loomed ominously in the distance. Their ships were massive, gleaming with polished metal and pulsing with energy. The Zorathian Colossus, the flagship of the enemy fleet, dominated the scene, its sheer size making the Vanguard look like a speck by comparison. "We're ready," Rachel announced as she entered the bridge, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. "The cloak should last long enough to get us close, but we'll need to move fast once we're inside." Nathan nodded, turning to address the crew. "This is it. We've trained for this, and we know the risks. Stick to the plan, stay sharp, and trust each other. Let's show them what humans are made of." The engines roared to life, and the Vanguard began its approach. The cloaking device hummed softly as it activated, enveloping the ship in a shimmering field that bent light around. To the naked eye, the Vanguard disappeared entirely, blending seamlessly into the darkness of space. The crew held their breath as they passed through the outer perimeter of the Concorde fleet. Enemy sensors scanned the area, but the Vanguard remained undetected. Once they were deep within the enemy formation, Nathan gave the order to decloak. The shimmering field dissipated, revealing the tiny human vessel in all its battered glory. Before the Concorde ships could react, Alex launched the first salvo of missiles, targeting a supply convoy drifting lazily nearby. Explosions lit up the void as the missiles struck their marks, sending debris spiraling into the darkness. "Hit the thrusters!" Nathan shouted, gripping the railing as Alex pushed the Vanguard into a tight, evasive maneuver. Enemy fire streaked past them, narrowly, missing the ship as Alex twisted and turned through the chaos. The conquered forces scrambled to respond, their larger ships struggling to match the agility of the much smaller Vanguard. "They're coming around!" Rachel called out from her station, her eyes glued to the sensor readings. "Two cruisers are breaking off to intercept us." "Keep us moving," Nathan ordered, his voice firm despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "We can't let them pin us down." Alex grinned, his hands flying across the controls as he guided. The Vanguard threw a series of dizzying maneuvers. The ship bucked and shuddered under the strain, but it held together. Laura Hayes clung to her seat, her knuckles white as she watched the battle unfold. She wasn't a fighter, but she understood the stakes just as well as anyone else. Her job was to keep the crew alive, and she was determined to do it no matter what. The skirmish lasted only a few minutes, but it felt like hours. By the time the Vanguard escaped back into the safety of the void, the Concorde convoy was in ruins. Supplies meant for the enemy fleet now drifted aimlessly through space, useless without the ships to carry them. Nathan allowed himself a small smile as he watched the aftermath on the viewport. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Back aboard the Vanguard, the mood was tense but triumphant. The crew gathered in the mess hall, exhausted but exhilarated by their success. Rachel slumped into a chair, her face pale but her eyes shining with pride. "That cloak held up better than I expected," she admitted, taking a sip of water. "If we can replicate that performance, we might actually have a shot." Alex leaned back in his chair, a cocky grin spreading across his face. "Told you. We'd surprise them. They won't know what hit them next time." Laura shook her head, though there was a hint of amusement in her expression. Don't get too confident. We got lucky out there. One wrong move, and we'd be space dust right now. Nathan listened to their banter, grateful for the camaraderie that kept them going. These people weren't just his crew. They were his family. Together they had pulled off something incredible, something that had caught the attention of not only the conquered, but also the rest of humanity. News of the attack spread quickly, carried by subspace transmissions to every corner of human-controlled space. For the first time in weeks, there was hope. But hope came with challenges. Other human ships began reaching out to the vanguard, seeking guidance and inspiration. Nathan found himself thrust into the role of leader, not just for his own crew, but for the entire tiny fleet. He spent hours coordinating with captains from other vessels, sharing strategies and boosting morale. It was exhausting work, but he couldn't afford to slow down. The Concorde wouldn't give them a moment's rest. As the days passed, Nathan continued to refine their tactics. Guerrilla warfare became their specialty, using hit-and-run attacks to harass the conquered fleet while avoiding direct confrontation. The vanguard led the charge, striking key targets and retreating before the enemy could mount a proper response. Each victory, no matter how small, chipped away at the conquered's confidence and forced them to divert resources to defend against further attacks. Rachel played a crucial role in their success, constantly upgrading the Vanguard systems to keep them one step ahead. She installed new weapon mods scavenged from damaged ships, rerouted power to boost the engines, and even managed to enhance the cloaking device's efficiency. Her innovations turned the Vanguard into a formidable opponent, capable of holding its own against much larger foes. Alex proved invaluable during combat, his reflexes unmatched by anyone else in the fleet. He flew the Vanguard like an extension of himself, weaving through enemy fire with precision and flair. More than once, his quick thinking saved the ship from certain destruction. Laura stayed by his side during missions, her calm demeanor a perfect counterbalance to his fiery personality. Together, they formed a dynamic duo that inspired the rest of the crew. Despite their successes, the cost of war weighed heavily on everyone. Casualties mounted as the conquered fought back with increasing ferocity. Nathan struggled with the burden of leadership, knowing that every decision he made could mean life or death for his crew. He confided in Laura one evening, sitting alone, in the mess hall while the rest of the ship slept. "I keep wondering if I'm doing the right thing," he admitted, his voice low and weary. "Every time we go out there, someone gets hurt, someone dies, and it's because of me." Laura placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, her expression soft but resolute. "You're not responsible for every loss, Nathan. War isn't clean or fair. All you can do is make sure those sacrifices mean something. You're giving people a reason to fight, a chance to protect what matters most. That's what leadership is about." Her words stayed with him, anchoring him when doubt threatened to overwhelm him. He knew she was right. They were fighting for more than survival. They were fighting for the future of humanity. Every battle, every victory brought them closer to that goal. The conquered alliance grew increasingly frustrated as the tiny fleet continued to defy expectations. Xyler Kren, the insectoid commander of the Zarathian Colossus, watched the reports with growing anger. His forces were superior in every way, yet they couldn't crush the persistent humans. He vowed to end the nuisance once and for all, ordering his fleet to focus on eliminating the Vanguard at any cost. Unaware of the renewed threat, Nathan and his crew pressed on, driven by a mix of determination and desperation. They had proven themselves time and again, showing the universe that humanity was far from weak. But they also knew the hardest battles were yet to come. The conquered wouldn't give up easily, and neither would they. In the quiet moments between missions, Nathan often gazed out at the stars, wondering what the future held. He thought about Earth, about the billions of people counting on them to hold the line. He thought about his crew, their courage and resilience inspiring him daily. And he thought about the sacrifices they had made, the lives lost in pursuit of a better tomorrow. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain. The tiny fleet had earned its place in history. Against all odds, they had risen to meet the challenge, proving that even the smallest efforts could change the course of destiny. The SS Vanguard had become a legend in its own time, a symbol of defiance against overwhelming odds. Nathan Brooks and his crew were no longer just a small group of humans fighting for survival. They were the heart of the tiny fleet, leading a ragtag collection of ships that refused to back down. The conquered alliance had underestimated them once, but now they were paying attention. Every move the Vanguard made was met with fierce resistance, forcing Nathan and his team to adapt or perish. Rachel Dawson spent most of her time buried in the engine room, surrounded by tools and half-finished projects. Her mind raced as she worked, constantly searching for ways to give the Vanguard an edge. She had already upgraded the cloaking system twice, improved the missile launchers, and even rigged a makeshift EMP device that could disable enemy sensors temporarily. But it wasn't enough. The conquered ships were too powerful, their shields too strong. If they wanted to win, they needed something more. One evening, while reviewing sensor data from their latest skirmish, Rachel noticed something strange. The shield generators on one of the Concorde cruisers flickered briefly before stabilizing again. At first, she thought it might have been a glitch, but further analysis revealed a pattern. The shields weakened slightly whenever the ship fired its main cannons. It was a tiny flaw, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Rachel's heart raced as she realized the implications. If they timed their attacks perfectly, they could exploit this weakness. She rushed to the bridge, clutching her tablet tightly. "Nathan," she said breathlessly, interrupting a tense discussion between him and Alex. "I think I found something. Their shields drop for a split second after they fire their main weapons." Nathan frowned, leaning closer to examine the data. "Are you sure about this?" "I ran the numbers 3 times, Rachel replied, her voice firm despite her excitement. "It's consistent. If we can hit them during that window, we might be able to punch through." Alex raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "That's a big if. What happens if we miss? They'll tear us apart." "We won't miss," Nathan said decisively, his eyes narrowing as he studied the information. "This is exactly what we've been waiting for, a way to level the playing field." The plan came together quickly. The Vanguard would lead a coordinated strike on a Concorde dreadnought, using Rachel's discovery to target its weakened shields. Other ships from the tiny fleet would provide cover, drawing enemy fire and keeping the larger vessels occupied. It was risky, but it was also their best chance to deal real damage. The night before the mission, the crew gathered in the mess hall for a quiet meal. The atmosphere was subdued, each person lost in their own thoughts. Laura Hayes sat quietly in the corner, stitching up a tear in her medical kit. She didn't speak much, but her presence was calming, a reminder that someone was always watching out for them. Alex leaned back in his chair, idly tossing a pen into the air and catching it. He tried to appear casual, but the tension in his jaw gave him away. Nathan stood near the viewport, staring out at the endless expanse of stars. He felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him, heavier than ever before. This mission could turn the tide of the war, or it could end in disaster. Either way, he knew they couldn't afford to hesitate. "Listen up," he said finally, turning to face the crew. "Tomorrow, we're going to do something that might change everything. I won't lie to you, it's dangerous, but if we succeed, we'll prove once and for all that we're not just a nuisance. We're a threat." The room fell silent as everyone absorbed his words. Rachel nodded slowly, her expression determined. "We've got this," she said softly. "We've come too far to stop now." Alex grinned, though there was a hint of nervousness in his eyes. Let's show them what we're made of. Laura stood up, her voice steady and reassuring. Whatever happens, I'll be here to patch you up. Just try not to get yourselves killed. The next morning, the Vanguard slipped silently through space, its cloaking system masking its approach. The rest of the tiny fleet moved into position, ready to spring the trap. Nathan watched the sensor readings closely, his hands gripping the railing as they closed in on the target. The Concorde dreadnought loomed ahead, its massive form bristling with weapons and glowing with energy shields. It was an intimidating sight, but Nathan pushed his fear aside. They had trained for this. Moment prepared for every possible outcome. Decloak on my mark, Nathan ordered, his voice calm but commanding. Rachel, monitor the shield fluctuations. Alex, keep us steady. Laura, stay sharp. The seconds ticked by agonizingly slowly as they waited for the perfect moment. Finally, the dreadnought fired its main cannons, sending a barrage of plasma, bolts streaking toward a nearby human ship. For a brief instant, the shields around the dreadnought flickered. Nathan seized the opportunity. Now! The cloaking field dropped, revealing the Vanguard directly in front of the enemy vessel. Rachel's calculations proved accurate. The shields were still recovering, leaving a narrow gap in their defenses. Nathan barked orders, his voice cutting through the chaos. Fire everything we've got! Missiles streaked from the Vanguard's launchers, followed by blasts from its railguns. The weapons struck true, punching through the weakened shields and slamming into the dreadnought's hull. Explosions erupted across its surface, sending chunks of debris tumbling into space. The Concorde crew scrambled to respond, but it was too late. The damage was done. As the Vanguard pulled away, the rest of the tiny fleet surged forward, launching their own attacks. Enemy ships turned to engage, but the sudden assault caught them off guard. For the first time, the conquered forces seemed unsure, their usual precision replaced by confusion and panic. Back aboard the Vanguard, the crew cheered as they watched the dreadnought drift helplessly, its systems crippled. Rachel let out a whoop of triumph, pumping her fist in the air. Did you see that? We did it! Alex grinned, his earlier nerves replaced by pure exhilaration. Told you we'd surprise them. But the celebration was short-lived. The Concorde fleet regrouped quickly, launching a furious counterattack. The tiny fleet fought valiantly, but the cost was high. Ships exploded around them, their crews lost forever. Nathan clenched his fists as he watched the carnage unfold. Every victory came at a price, and today was no exception. When the battle finally ended, the survivors limped back to their rendezvous point. The Vanguard was battered but intact, its crew exhausted but alive. Nathan gathered them in the mess hall, his expression somber. We did good out there, he said quietly. But we lost a lot of people, friends, allies. We need to honor their sacrifice by keeping the fight alive. Rachel nodded, her earlier excitement tempered by the reality of what they had endured. We'll keep improving. Make sure their deaths weren't in vain. Alex leaned forward, his voice unusually serious. What's next, boss? You know they're going to hit us harder now. Nathan sighed, running a hand through his hair. We keep doing what we've been doing. Hit them where it hurts, then disappear before they can retaliate. And we find more weaknesses. There's always a flaw if you look hard enough. Laura spoke up, her tone gentle but firm. And we take care of each other. That's how we survive. The days that followed were a blur of repairs, planning, and mourning. The tiny fleet grew stronger as reinforcements arrived from Earth, bringing fresh supplies and new recruits eager to join the cause. Word of their success spread, inspiring hope among the colonies. People began to believe that humanity could stand up to the Concorde, that they weren't destined to be crushed underfoot. But Nathan knew the hardest battles were yet to come. The Concorde wouldn't forgive such a humiliating defeat, and Xylar Kren, the insectoid commander of the Zorathian Colossus, would stop at nothing to crush the rebellion. He vowed to destroy the Vanguard and its crew, viewing them as the greatest threat to his dominion. Despite the looming danger, Nathan felt a spark of optimism. They had proven themselves time and again, showing the universe that humanity was resilient, resourceful, and unyielding. The tiny fleet had started as a joke, a desperate last resort dismissed by friend and foe alike. Now it was a force to be reckoned with. In the quiet moments between missions, Nathan often thought about the sacrifices they had made. Each loss weighed heavily on him, a reminder of the cost of freedom. But he also remembered the victories, the moments when they had defied expectations and shown the concord that humans were not to be underestimated. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain. The tiny fleet had earned its place in history. Against all odds, they had risen to meet the challenge, proving that even the smallest efforts could change the course of destiny. The SS Vanguard drifted silently in the void, its battered hull reflecting the faint light of a distant star. The ship had become a symbol of hope for humanity, but it was also a magnet for danger. The conquered alliance was no longer laughing at the tiny fleet. Instead, they were seething with anger. Xylar Kren, the insectoid commander of the Zorathian Colossus, had made it clear that he would stop at nothing to destroy the humans who dared defy him. For Nathan Brooks and his crew, the stakes had never been higher. Nathan stood on the bridge, staring at the holographic display hovering above the central console. The image showed the Concorde fleet arrayed like a wall of steel, their ships bristling with weapons and glowing with energy shields. At the heart of the formation loomed the Zorathian Colossus, a behemoth so massive it seemed to blot out the stars behind it. It wasn't just a warship. It was the nerve center of the Concorde forces, coordinating every movement and attack. If they could take it down, the rest of the fleet would fall into chaos. Rachel Dawson sat nearby, her tablet covered in notes and diagrams. She had been working non-stop, trying to find a way to penetrate the Colossus's defenses. "Their shields are too strong," she muttered, frustration evident in her voice. "Even if we hit them during a weak point, it won't be enough to bring them down." Nathan frowned, leaning closer to examine her calculations. "What about targeting specific systems? Can we disable their engines or weapons?" Rachel hesitated, tapping her pen against the screen. "Maybe. Their core reactors are deep inside the ship, protected by multiple layers of shielding. But if we could get someone inside—" Her words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Nathan straightened, his mind racing. Infiltrating the EAT, Zorathian Colossus, was suicide, but it might be their only chance. He turned to Alex Carter, who was lounging in the pilot's seat, idly spinning a control knob. "Alex, how good are you at flying under fire?" Alex raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "Good enough to dodge plasma bolts while sipping coffee." "Why?" "We need volunteers for a ground mission," Nathan said, his tone serious. "Someone has to sneak aboard the Colossus and plant explosives near the core." Laura Hayes looked up from her station, her expression sharp with concern. "That's insane. Even if they make it inside, there's no guarantee they'll survive." "I know," Nathan replied, his voice steady despite the weight of his decision. "But it's the only way to end this. We can't keep fighting forever." The room fell silent as everyone processed the plan. Finally, Alex spoke up, his usual cockiness replaced by grim determination. "I'll do it. I'm the best pilot we've got, and someone needs to lead the team." Nathan hesitated, torn between gratitude and guilt. He knew Alex was right. He was the most qualified for the job, but sending him into such danger felt like a betrayal. Still, there was no time to hesitate. "All right," he said finally. "But you're not going alone. Rachel, prep some EMP charges. Laura, pack medical supplies. We'll send a small strike team with Alex to cover him." The hours that followed were a blur of preparation. Rachel worked tirelessly to modify the explosives, ensuring they would deliver maximum damage. Laura double-checked the med kits, adding extra doses of painkillers and stimulants. Nathan coordinated with the rest of the tiny fleet, devising a plan to draw the Concorde's attention away from the Colossus. Every detail mattered. One mistake could doom the entire mission. As the team gathered in the hangar bay, Nathan addressed them one last time. Alex stood at the front, his combat gear strapped tightly around his lean frame. Behind him were 3 other volunteers, 2 engineers and a Marine, all chosen for their skills and bravery. Nathan locked eyes with Alex, his voice firm but tinged with emotion. "You know what's at stake. Get in, plant the charges, and get out." "Don't take unnecessary risks." Alex nodded, his expression unreadable. "Don't worry, boss. We'll get the job done." The shuttle launched from the Vanguard, its engines roaring as it sped toward the Zorathian Colossus. Meanwhile, the rest of the tiny fleet moved into position, launching a diversionary attack on the Concorde's outer perimeter. Explosions lit up the void as missiles streaked through space, drawing the enemy's attention. For a brief moment, the Colossus was left vulnerable. Inside the shuttle, Alex gripped the controls tightly, his knuckles white as he guided the vessel through a hail of enemy fire. The team braced themselves as the shuttle shuddered violently, its shields flickering under the assault. "Hold on!" Alex shouted, pulling the shuttle into a tight spiral. With a final burst of speed, they slipped through the Colossus's docking bay doors and landed hard on the deck. The team disembarked quickly, their weapons drawn as they moved through the dimly lit corridors. The interior of the Colossus was eerily quiet, the hum of machinery the only sound breaking the silence. Rachel's EMP charges crackled softly as Alex attached them to key junctions, disabling security systems and clearing their path. But they weren't alone for long. A squad of Concorde soldiers rounded the corner, their armored forms towering over the humans. Shots rang out as the 2 groups clashed, the narrow hallway illuminated by flashes of gunfire. Alex fought with precision, his movements fluid and efficient. The engineers provided covering fire while the Marine held the line, his bulky frame absorbing hits meant for the others. "Keep moving," Alex barked, leading the way deeper into the ship. They reached the reactor chamber after what felt like an eternity, the massive core glowing ominously in the center of the room. Alex set to work planting the explosives, his hands steady despite the chaos erupting around them. The Concorde forces regrouped, pouring into the chamber in overwhelming numbers. "We're not going to make it out," one of the engineers said, his voice trembling as he reloaded his weapon. "Yes, we are," Alex replied sharply, finishing the setup. "Fall back to the shuttle. I'll hold them off." "No!" the Marine growled, stepping forward. "You go. I'll stay." Before Alex could argue, the Marine charged at the enemy, firing wildly and drawing their attention. His sacrifice bought the team precious seconds, allowing them to retreat toward the docking bay. Alex hesitated for a moment, then followed, his jaw clenched with determination. When they reached the shuttle, Alex sealed the hatch and activated the autopilot. "Detonate the charges remotely," he ordered, his voice hoarse. Rachel complied, her fingers trembling as she pressed the button. A deafening explosion rocked the Colossus, its core collapsing in a brilliant flash of light. The Zorathian Colossus listed violently, its once imposing form now a burning wreck. The rest of the Concorde fleet scrambled to respond, their coordination shattered without the flagship to guide them. The tiny fleet seized the opportunity, launching a final assault that pushed the enemy back. Back aboard the Vanguard, Nathan watched the destruction unfold, his heart pounding with relief and sorrow. The mission had succeeded, but at a terrible cost. Alex's shuttle limped back to the fleet, its hull scarred and smoking. When the hatch opened, Alex stumbled out, his face pale but triumphant. "Mission accomplished," he said weakly, collapsing into Nathan's arms. The crew erupted into cheers, their voices echoing through the ship. They had done the impossible, striking a blow that would change the course of the war. But Nathan couldn't shake the grief weighing on him. Too many lives had been lost, too many sacrifices made. As he helped Alex to the medbay, he vowed to honor their memory by continuing the fight. In the days that followed, the Concord Alliance retreated, their forces in disarray. Humanity celebrated the victory, hailing the tiny fleet as heroes. But Nathan knew the war wasn't over. There would be more battles, more losses, and more challenges ahead. Yet for the first time, he allowed himself to feel a glimmer of hope. Against all odds, they had proven that even the smallest efforts could tip the scales of destiny. The destruction of the Zorathian Colossus sent shockwaves through the conquered alliance, both literally and figuratively. The massive flagship, once a symbol of their dominance, was now a smoldering wreck drifting lifelessly through space. Without its command center, the Concord fleet faltered, their coordination crumbling into chaos. Ships scattered, retreating to safer zones as they tried to regroup. For the first time in years, the Concord looked vulnerable. Back aboard the SS Vanguard, the mood was somber, despite the victory. Nathan Brooks stood on the bridge, staring at the viewport where the remnants of the Colossus still glowed faintly in the distance. He felt a strange mix of emotions, pride in what they had achieved, relief that the immediate threat was over, but also an overwhelming sadness for those who hadn't made it back. Alex Carter lay in the medbay, his body battered but alive, thanks to Laura Hayes's relentless efforts. The Marine who had stayed behind to cover their escape was gone, along with countless others from the tiny fleet who had given everything to turn the tide. Rachel Dawson sat quietly in the engine room, her hands resting on her knees as she stared at the floor. She had spent so much time calculating, tinkering, and planning, always thinking about how to outsmart the enemy. But no amount of preparation could erase the cost of war. Every explosion, every hit on the shields, every life lost weighed heavily on her. She wasn't just a mechanic anymore. She was part of something bigger, something that demanded sacrifices she never imagined making. Laura moved between the injured crew members in the medbay, her movements calm and deliberate. She cleaned wounds, administered medicine, and offered quiet words of comfort to those in pain. Her job was to heal, but even she couldn't mend the emotional scars left by the battle. As she worked, she thought about the Marine who had saved them all. His name was Daniel, and though she hadn't known him well, his bravery would stay with her forever. Nathan gathered the crew in the mess hall later that evening. The room was quiet, the usual chatter replaced by a heavy silence. He cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention. "We did it," he began, his voice soft but steady. "Against all odds, we took down the Colossus. Because of you, humanity has a fighting chance." He paused, looking around at the tired faces before him. "But none of this came without a price. We lost good people today, friends, heroes, and I want to make sure we never forget them." Rachel nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "They gave us hope," she said quietly. "Not just for ourselves, but for everyone back home." Alex, propped up in a chair despite Laura's protests, managed a weak smile. "Yeah, and they'd kick our butts if we let it go to waste." A few people chuckled softly, the tension easing slightly. Nathan continued, his tone growing firmer. "This isn't the end. The conquered will come back stronger, angrier, but so will we. We've shown them what humans are capable of, and we'll keep showing them. Together." The days that followed were filled with repairs, rest, and reflection. The tiny fleet regrouped, their numbers smaller but their resolve stronger than ever. Word of their victory spread quickly, carried by subspace transmissions to Earth and its colonies. The news ignited a fire of pride and unity among humanity. People who had once doubted the fleet's chances now celebrated their triumph, calling them heroes. Supplies and reinforcements poured in, bolstering the fleet's strength. Admiral Grayson, the same man who had dismissed the tiny fleet as insignificant, contacted Nathan personally. His face appeared on the main screen, his expression unreadable. "Brooks," he said gruffly, "you've done more than anyone thought possible. Humanity owes you a debt we can never repay." Nathan inclined his head, his expression neutral. "We didn't do it alone, sir. Everyone played a part." Grayson nodded, his tone softening slightly. "Still, your leadership turned the tide. The Concord is suing for peace talks. They know they can't win this war outright, not against fighters like you." The announcement brought a wave of relief, but Nathan knew better than to trust the Concord completely. Peace talks meant negotiations, compromises, and possibly betrayals. Still, it was a step forward, a chance to secure humanity's future without further bloodshed. As preparations for the talks began, Nathan found himself reflecting on everything they had been through. He walked the corridors of the Vanguard, listening to the hum of the engines and the distant voices of his crew. Each step reminded him of the sacrifices made, the lives lost, and the bonds forged in the heat of battle. These people weren't just soldiers or engineers. They were family. Together, they had faced the impossible and emerged victorious. One evening, Nathan joined Rachel and Laura in the mess hall. They sat at a table near the window, watching the stars drift lazily past. Rachel pushed her glasses up her nose, breaking the silence. "Do you think they'll really negotiate in good faith?" "I don't know," Nathan admitted, leaning back in his chair. "But we've proven we're not afraid to stand our ground. That gives us leverage." Laura nodded, her gaze thoughtful. "And it gives hope to everyone else. They see that, even when things look hopeless, there's always a way to fight back." Nathan smiled faintly, appreciating her optimism. "You're right. We may not have won the war yet, but we've changed the story. No one will underestimate us again." The peace talks took place on a neutral planet, a barren world with little more than a single domed structure to house the negotiations. Representatives from Earth and the Concord Alliance gathered around a long table, their expressions guarded but hopeful. Nathan attended alongside Admiral Grayson, serving as both a witness and a reminder of humanity's resilience. Xylar Kren, the insectoid commander who had once mocked the tiny fleet, avoided meeting Nathan's gaze throughout the proceedings. After days of tense discussions, an agreement was reached. The Concord would withdraw from human-controlled territories and cease hostilities, provided humanity agreed to certain trade and diplomatic conditions. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to ensure peace, for now. When the Vanguard returned, to Earth, the crew was greeted as heroes. Crowds lined the streets, cheering and waving flags as the ship descended. Nathan stood on the observation deck, watching the scene unfold below. He felt a surge of pride, but also a deep sense of responsibility. This victory wasn't just for them. It was for everyone who believed in a better future. Later, during a memorial service held aboard the Vanguard, Nathan delivered a heartfelt speech honoring those who had fallen. "They didn't die in vain," he said, his voice strong despite the lump in his throat. "Their courage inspired us to keep fighting, to prove that humanity is worth defending. We'll carry their legacy forward, building a world where their sacrifices mean something." As the ceremony ended, the crew dispersed, each person lost in their own thoughts. Nathan remained on the bridge, staring out at the stars. The scars of war would linger, but so would the lessons learned. They had faced the impossible and prevailed, proving that even the smallest efforts could change the course of history. In the quiet moments that followed, Nathan allowed himself to dream of the future, a future where humanity stood united, where the sacrifices of the past paved the way for a brighter tomorrow. The Vanguard drifted silently among the stars, its battered hull a testament to the courage of those who dared to defy the impossible.